Hello and welcome to the RevRx podcast, where we discuss all things faith, family, and health. My name is Chad Potts. I'm your host, and today I'm so excited to share with you one of my very favorite people in all the world, Brian Bogert, on this episode. Brian is a keynote speaker. He's a transformational coach. He's a phenomenal human being, and you're going to love hearing about what he's doing in the world today. A little bit about Brian. He has a story that goes back to when he was 7 years old. He was involved in a traumatic accident that actually left his arm severed from his body. And what he learned was that regardless of what our story is, and we all have one, that the physical, the emotional, and the mental pain that we experience in our past can sometimes leave us buried, can sometimes hold us back and keep us from becoming the very best version of ourselves. And so Brian is working hard to help people take out the trash from their past, really help move us forward as human beings. And you're going to love getting to know Brian in our episode today. Without further ado, I introduce you to my friend, Brian Bogert. Brian, thanks so much for joining me today. What a pleasure it is to have you here with me. My coach, my mentor, my friend, just think the world of you. So appreciate you being here.
Love you to pieces, and I'm excited to be here and watch you continue to grow and create impact, and feel blessed to have been a part of walking alongside you here for a little while, which is pretty cool.
It's been fun. One of the things I love about you, Brian, is your story. I don't know many people whose stories have been nationally televised, and it's just a gripping story that happened to you so long ago, but yet it still remained very much a part of you even today. Can you share with us a little bit about that as we get started in our time together?
Yeah, and I think just given the format of the show, I'll just give the kind of expedited version. If people want a longer version, you can Google my name and the story and you'll find it all over the place. But for the purposes of today, I just want people to have a little bit of an understanding. So it was August 10th, 1992. It was a 115-degree day. We were in Phoenix, Arizona, and we went to Walmart to get a 1-inch paintbrush. As we were getting back to our car, this was back in the days before there was key fobs. So I had to wait for my mom to literally reach her hand in the purse, grab the keys, pull them out, stick them in the door, turn them so we could go on with our way. And it wasn't a surprise to her that I was the first one in the car. I was there waiting. I wanted to get home and put that paintbrush to use. And so as I was waiting for my mom and brother, who were only 3 or 4 feet behind me, to catch up, there was a truck that came out of control backwards, hit our car, knocked me over, ran over me diagonally, tearing my spleen, leaving a tire track scar on my stomach, and continuing on to sever my left arm completely from my body. The next thing my mom hears is my brother's voice saying, "Mom, Brian's arm is over there." And as she follows where he's pointing, she sees a trail of my muscle cooking like hamburger on the asphalt. Now, I'm very blessed, and I have to always give acknowledgement to the woman other than my mom that saved my life, because there was a nurse there that day who walked out of the store, saw the literal life and limb scenario in front of her, and she rushed immediately into action. I've said for years that I've been forever indebted to this woman for her choice to go into action in that moment, and that became even more powerful when I met her on the 30th anniversary of the accident for the very first time, and I learned that she had a friend with her that day who was also a nurse, who also had all the same training, who actually chose to turn her head and go on with her day. Now, here's the reality. I want to be really clear for anybody listening. I have no mal energy, intent, nothing. I've got no negative energy towards this woman who turned her head. That was well within her right. But why do I pause long enough to bring this into clarity? Because a singular choice in a singular moment can have a ripple effect that will impact hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives. And we all have the ability to make those actions in singular moments. And I know that my story is unique, Chad. And so one of the things that I also would say, and I want to make sure is heard very loud and clear, is in all my time of doing this, I know how unique it is. But I've also learned that every single one of you and all of us have a unique story. So what becomes important, regardless of the extremities of our stories, is that we learn how to pause and extract the lessons we can from our stories so we can become intentional in how we apply them moving forward. And I believe we all have the ability to not only share our own stories, but to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories to shorten our own curves to learn.
Absolutely. And, not everyone is going to have a unique story like yours. There are people listening, may feel like, well, I can't really relate to that because my story isn't nearly as dramatic. I get that in the pastoral world where I minister. People who have come from different backgrounds and who have really turned their lives around. And some people say, well, I'm inferior because I don't have that kind of story. But all of our stories are important. All of our stories shape our lives. And all of our stories, really kind of lead us towards the people we're becoming. And so
Right.
tell me a little bit about how that impacted you both, at an early age. You've got some issues with the arm,
Hmm.
um, living in chronic pain, even into recent days. What impact did that event that happened so long ago, that traumatic event, have on Brian Bogert?
Yeah, I think the list is too long to cover it all for the purposes of today.
Yeah.
But what I will say is that I used to believe this was my transformation story, like my origin story. And what I know now very, very clearly was just the story that created a lot of trash from my past that I pushed through and pushed down for years and had a ripple effect of impact that I'm sure we're going to cover pieces of today. But the part I want to start with is really the beginning antithesis of all of this, right? Like, where did this begin? And to your point, exactly, with all of our unique stories, what is relatable is what the human experience is throughout.
Yes.
Right. So I come out of the hospital. I'm 7 years old. I'm cute. I've always had this magnetism and I've always had access to words and energy. And so people would inevitably come up and start asking me what happened. It was also very obvious because I had a teddy bear in between my arm because my arm had to heal at 90 degrees. So clearly there was something that had happened. I had an injury and everybody would say, "What happened?" They were expecting me to be like, I was racing my brother down our bikes on the street or I flew off the jungle gym or whatever. But what would I do? I'd look them deadpan in the eye and say I was run over by a truck and my left arm was struck. Now, 99% of people did two things following that. After they picked their jaws up off the ground, they would pause and they'd turn to my parents for validation, which told me what? They didn't see me. They didn't understand me. They weren't accepting and believing my truth. And I didn't feel connected to any of them as a result of that. And then those same people would start to view me through their lens of what they'd be capable of in my situation, immediately limiting me and telling me all the things I'd never be able to do.
Wow.
Right. And so why I start there is I became very accustomed early on to believing and accepting that people weren't going to accept my truth. Even if I'm living and breathing and I'm wearing my truth, and yet they still weren't accepting it. And so I got really used to being the only one in most rooms I've ever been in my life. Right. And I say that because there are many people, regardless of what their situation is, that made them feel isolated or alone, even when surrounded by people, who can understand that feeling of isolation. Right. And so do I understand what it's like to be a person of color? Do I understand what it's like to be a woman? Do I understand what it's like to be somebody who's got other types of chronic diseases? No, I don't. But I do understand what it's like to be different and to be a standout in most crowds that people don't necessarily understand.
Wow.
And so what did that do? That created this belief system for me that I needed to get mentally tough and have this mindset, because at the time, that's all I had access to. And so what did that actually mean? I shut myself off from a whole lot of other things that had a ripple effect for other years. But ultimately, it was Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. And I lived the next 13 years of my life shattering other people's expectations. And what I now know today, looking back, is that I was unconsciously trying to shatter my own as well. And that led me down a path that was amazing because I accomplished all these cool things. However, I was still living with that narrative. So fast forward a little bit till the age of 20, I've never let my arm stop me. I was a tennis pro at age 14. I learned how to water ski, got out of the water with one arm. I mountain biked as early as 12 to 14 years old. Like, never once did I let it stop me. And the truth of that as well is that my rush threshold was up here. And I had such a healthy relationship with mortality that I often had to push the limits of death just to feel alive. So it walked me down this beautiful path. But why I say that is I was snowboarding at age 20. I was a pretty good snowboarder. I did trick parks. I was all over the place. But one day I went down and I broke my left arm again in the same spot it came off at. And the next 10 months were a really transformational period of my life because I was isolated. I was alone. I went 10 months with my arm hanging by my side, went through 7 surgeons who were afraid to touch me. And despite the fact that, again, I was surrounded by people, friends, really close relationships, people that I'd done a lot for, no one was there for me. And I started to get resentful and frustrated and felt really disconnected. I got into the deepest, darkest depression I'd ever been in my adult life. I put on 40 pounds in 10 months because I was eating my feelings, right? But after I took a moment, I realized I can't be upset at anybody else. The world bought into the power of my narrative. Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. Now, the issue is they added a fifth one to it that I wasn't aware of, which was Brian will ask for help if he needs it. But in my most vulnerable period in my adult life, at that point, I didn't have the courage to ask for help. And so that changed the trajectory of my life. And I started with those first periods in terms of impact because there are other pieces that were still unconscious for another number of years, but it ultimately developed into shame and anger and disconnection. And despite the fact that I was healed physically, I also was not healed emotionally, mentally, or spiritually until years later.
And that's something that I see a lot. It's something that I've experienced personally. You can have issues where you are healed in one way. You may have moved past it. You may have, physically the healing has manifested, right? However, you're not healed emotionally. You're not healed, from a mindset perspective. And so a lot of what you do today is helping people be able to reach back, look at some of those events in their lives that may have caused trauma, which may have wounded us, because let's face it, we all probably have something that has wounded us in the past that we have not healed from. Again, we might have put distance and time between us, but we haven't healed from it. What can that do to us from a limitation standpoint as people who are seeking happiness, satisfaction in our lives today? How can that past trauma and not healing from it completely limit us moving forward?
There's lots of different components to it. What I'll start with, just to kind of acknowledge what you had said, is that I did deal with a lot of physical pain for a lot of years, right? And it was something that I used to believe was physical pain. And I start answering this question this way because I think it's really important for people to understand. I didn't learn until I was about age 32 that when I shut off physical pain because it exceeded my ability to cope, I also shut off mental pain, emotional pain, and spiritual pain for about 20 to 25 years, and I didn't realize it. Okay. Now, what did that also do? It caused me to exist often in a really protective state that disconnected me from a lot of who I was and what I wanted. Why I say all that as it relates to the daily physical pain for nearly 31 years is that I'm going on a year and 2 months with zero physical pain. And people ask me, what'd you do differently? Because I've done everything. If there's a modality, a healing mechanism, whether it's woo-woo, Eastern, Western, I've done it all. Because my pain was at a place where it was debilitating for about 20 years. Yeah. And so I did not want to be living my life in a way that I couldn't be active. Yeah. What I did is that it's the deepest amount of healing and the deepest amount of congruence I've ever created in my life. So what I find most often with individuals, okay, is that for some virtue or some reason, they're born as their brightest, most authentic burning light they'll ever be. And then parents, teachers, coaches, and employers start saying, you should do this, you shouldn't do this. You should be this, you shouldn't be that. You should want this, you shouldn't want that. Should's a shame-based word and implies that whoever we are, whatever we're doing, it's not good enough. Right? But the reality of it is that our bodies also are tied so closely to our nervous systems, which are designed to protect us. It's designed to anticipate threat, anticipate risk. And it makes sense that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn all comes as a direct result of our nervous systems, which are designed to help us survive. Right? 100 years ago, you cut your leg, you could die. But that's not our current reality anymore. And so we have to recognize it's time to update our operating systems. But what we work on is helping people identify and remove what we call the trash from people's past. What is that? Everyone has trash. And the first thing I want you all to hear before I say this is that the trash from your past is not your fault.
Yes.
It just becomes your responsibility once you become aware of it. Why do I say it's not your fault? Because it's generationally inherited. It's patterned down and it's connected to the emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, and environmental conditioning that have created a set of beliefs that our lives have only continued to further validate. And so escaping those patterns can seem really daunting. But I'll give an example of one in my own life, right? It came from a protective nature and a protective state because I learned that people weren't going to accept my truth. They weren't going to see me. They weren't going to understand me. And what did I also learn? I learned to receive love, validation, and connection through performance, which meant that my value and my relationships were always contingent upon what I did for other people. Right?
That's so good.
High performer. Great. I crushed it in business. I had everything I ever thought I would want by age 27, but it cost me who I was. Yeah. But it would show up in my family like this. Ashley would ask me a really simple question like, hey, honey, what are we doing with the kids this weekend? But my shame and my anger filter would cause me to hear it this way. Hey, honey, you've not done enough to be a good husband and father here recently, so what are you going to do to make up for it this weekend? And immediately I get into a reactive, defensive state. I feel everything move through my body. And what do? I rattle off the 10 things I've done in the last 4 days to show her I'm a good husband and father. That wasn't even what she was asking.
Mhm.
Right. And so what I find is that our trash from our past causes us to react in moments, often creating damage when it has nothing to do with what's right in front of us. It's cellular memory being activated to create the reaction that takes us out of the present moment.
Sure.
And so when people want to live with joy, freedom, and fulfillment, the only way to get there is to identify and remove the sources and start to create new patterns in the way that our bodies and our cells actually show up in moments, because most of what we're reacting to has nothing to do with the present moment and what's in front of us. It could be connected to how our dad looked at us when we loaded the dishwasher incorrectly when we were 9, right? Or any other variety of conditioned reactional responses that make us feel not good enough, not seen, not understood, and not able to stand in our power and potential.
That's so good. And I relate and resonate with 100% of what you just said. And odds are most people do. We've all had those moments where we react in a way that is not helpful, but instead it creates damage to relationships, to situations. Because when you react that way, how's your spouse going to respond? Then
Exactly.
They're going to put up their armor, and that's not a good thing for anybody. Now you've got both of you on the defensive. And so, recognizing that, hey, this has nothing to do with what's in front of me. This has everything to do with something deeper, something that I probably am not aware of. So if you were to say, if we've got people listening that can resonate with that, they're like, man, how do we fix this? How do we fix this? How does one become self-aware of some of those things? Is it this journey inward? Is it this journey that, of just trying to locate the event that happened in the past? Or what's your advice as far as that goes?
Yeah, I think awareness is the most important and critical piece. But what I want to caution in the beginning is that most people go down a path of creating awareness that ultimately results in then just becoming more aware of all the ways they should be judging themselves. Right. And so it's this perpetual never ending cycle, and it's connected to shame and blame.
Yeah.
So the first thing that I really want to say is that to raise awareness, it has to start from an objective and non-judgmental place. We have to remove the shame and blame from it as it relates to us putting blame on ourselves for any number of things. Okay. So the very first thing that I want people to start to be able to recognize, because I've not met a person who doesn't know what this looks like, is identify those moments in which you are getting triggered or you find yourself in a protective state of any kind, meaning you're armored, you're hiding, you're retreating for any number of reasons. Right. The reason I highlight those two things is because those are moments to open, slow down, and understand.
Yeah.
Okay. But why is this important? Because when we get triggered or when we find ourselves in a protective state, we can actually ask ourselves a series of questions. Okay. And I'll share with you the human experience and the 4 things we all seek and desire in just a minute. But I want this just to land so that it's really actionable for people. Sure. If you are guarded or you are triggered, these are both moments to ask these questions. Is what I'm reacting to right now due to what's right in front of me or the trash from my past? A little secret. I've worked with thousands of people, and 99.9% of the time, it's the second. Yep. Okay. Now, the second question is, what am I protecting right now? Great example of when I reacted to my wife. What was I protecting? Being a good husband and father is something that I care deeply about. I have said that it's my number one priority for 20 years, though my actions were not always congruent, even though my intent was in alignment. So when she's saying that to me, even though what she said was not what I heard, what's happening is I'm protecting the idea that I don't want to be suggested that I'm not a good husband and father, right? I don't want to have to justify, defend that I am. I'm protecting that, which means my armor was up, which is why I was reacting and defending. Okay, so that's an example, but ask the question, like, what am I protecting right now? Sure. If those 2 first questions haven't helped you separate from the current moment and neutralize your energy, the third question typically gets everyone else there. Am I safe right now? Am I mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally safe? And if the answer to that question is yes, which it will be in most situations, then it's a moment to take a breath and pause and recognize that now is the time to listen more clearly. Now is the time to open my heart. And now is the time to try to make sure that I drop that armor so that I can be really present in this moment to ensure that I'm hearing and feeling and seeing and saying all the things that are in alignment for me. Sure.
And you'd mentioned those 4 things. I really love that. It's a human experience. We all need to have. This is where suffering comes from. So can you go into that a little bit? That's something that has resonated and stuck with me. I can spit them out like you can, but I'm going to let you do it.
Okay. So the human experience, I think we all seek and desire four things. We all want to feel safe. We all want to feel protected, and those are not the same thing. We all want to feel seen and understood, and we all want to feel connected. So the second we walk into an environment where we don't feel seen and understood or connected or protected, what do? We protect ourselves. For those that are listening, think of a 35-gallon black trash bag for those outdoor bins. Unfold it, grab onto each corner, and lift it up in front of your face. This is your armor. This is how you're protecting yourself. Now, you could be doing this going to a networking event where everybody wants something from you instead of for you, and everybody's handing out business cards. This could happen going back to your family's house for the holidays, and your aunt, and your grandma, and your dad have always made you feel a certain way, and you start dreading it and armoring up weeks before you're even there, right? It could be a small interaction with your spouse where you feel misunderstood. But the point is the second you protect yourself, right, you're now holding this armor up in front of you. I want to ask you all to just consider, how could you ever properly expect anybody to see who you are, what you want, what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do, your heart, your soul, your desire, your intent, your boundaries, delivered through an opaque force field? And that's assuming that they're not carrying their own that's going to further dilute the message.
Yep.
And so I believe that the second we protect ourselves, we guarantee we're going to disconnect ourselves from who we are and what we want most, which is to be seen and understood and connected. Now, the suffering piece that you mentioned is a real dynamic of this. And so I have to highlight that as well in this answer. I believe we all suffer in four areas. It's the things that are left unsaid, the things that we lack permission to feel or say, the things we lack the words to articulate or understand, or the things that are left undone. So my existence in this world is to allow my truth to give others permission to live theirs. We also happen to be on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as we can by reducing the level of suffering that exists on this planet. So every time I talk about my shame and how it impacted my business and my family and my relationships, my anger, I talk about the financial extortion and loss that hit me really hard a couple of years back. Every time I talk about these things that many people would actually try to hide from the world, I'm freeing myself from my own suffering because I'm acting and doing on both.
Yes.
But what am I also doing? I'm giving people permission to feel and say things that they wouldn't have otherwise. And I'm giving them words to articulate and understand so that they now can act and do and no longer need to operate hidden behind their armor.
That's so powerful. And I want to go back a little bit. One of the things you said is that, your trash in your past is not your fault, but it becomes your responsibility. The things that you're describing are hard things to do. Let's face it. We don't love getting introspective a lot of times. That takes work. That takes intentionality. And it may even lead to some momentary pain. So that brings up two things I want to mention to you. Number one, I think a lot of times when we are reacting in the way that we do, for example, like what you said with your spouse, right? When we respond that way, our two reactions are usually either there's something wrong with me, I'm an angry person, I'm a, whatever, fill in the blank. Or the opposite can also be true where we say, that's just because my dad did this when I was young. Or that's just because of something in my past. And so neither one of those things are really helpful. When we don't make it our responsibility and we say, well, it's because of whatever happened to me in my past, and we just move on, that's not helpful. Maybe that's part of our self-awareness, but we're missing a crucial step there, aren't we? And then when we cast blame on ourselves, that's also not helpful either. That's perpetuating the process. And one of the things that you have taught me, embrace pain to avoid suffering.
Yeah.
Embrace pain to avoid suffering. So I say all that to say this. It's not enough to just be aware. Believe me, I've been there. Now what do we do about it? And it's that hard work. It's that momentary pain of working through, why am I this way? Why do I respond this way? What is triggering? That's where the magic happens. And if we want to avoid the suffering, then we have to then move forward with the momentary pain. Can you hit on that? The whole embracing pain to avoid suffering?
Absolutely, I can. This was one of the first frameworks that we created and developed, and it came from a necessity, really. It was, whether it was intentional or not, it was something that I learned from my parents, because growing up, the idea of seeing their son grow up without the use of his left arm was a source of great potential suffering for them. So they literally embraced the pains day in and day out. to navigate and do the things that were important and necessary to ultimately strengthen and heal me. Okay. Now, we can embrace the pain of hitting the gym for 30 minutes a day to avoid the suffering of aches and pains of a sedentary lifestyle.
Yes.
We can embrace the pain of a difficult conversation with a loved one or spouse to avoid the suffering of being stuck in a loveless marriage and not knowing how to fix it, or really wanting to get out and not knowing a way out.
Mm-hmm.
We can embrace the pain of a difficult conversation to have our kids put down their mobile devices at the dinner table to avoid the suffering of years of lost meaningful connection and conversation that we'll never get back.
Yes.
Right? As business owners, we can embrace the pain of firing our top salesperson who's contributing the most to top line growth to avoid the suffering of losing all our other top talent because they were the greatest cancer in our culture. Mm-hmm. Right? But the ultimate and real truth is it's important that we embrace the pain to actually look inward long enough to be able to unpack those things that continue to show up as patterns in our life to avoid the suffering of never being able to stand in our full power and potential. And at the end of the day, like, that's what is meaningful, right? When I talk about my anger, it almost cost me my wife and my kids. That is my definition of suffering, is a life without the three of them in it, which meant that I had to embrace the pain of going inward and actually unpacking and healing, not just my shame, but my anger, which is what was creating most of the damage. Because had I not, I would have lived and existed in a life of suffering. And so that's the highest level descriptor of it. Obviously, we go deeper, just like we do with awareness as the first pillar of waste to wealth. There's 5 pillars that guide people down this path.
Sure.
You know, the reality of it is that it always is going to start with awareness, because what we are unaware of, we can never be intentional with.
Absolutely. When you and I first met, one of the first questions you asked me was, Chad, how do you see success? How do you define success? What does that look like to you? And I gave you an answer, and it was my answer at that period of time. And my definition of success has shifted tremendously, because I also come from a place of my worth is determined by what I do for other people. My worth is determined by the actions that I perform. And I very much have tried to distance myself from that. That's just not a healthy way to go. Thanks to you. But what should's not a good word. What does success mean to you? Someone who has navigated this for a long time and is now helping others navigate the process.
It's very simple for me. Joy, freedom, and fulfillment. It's the only thing that matters. I get chills when I say it. The only way to experience those things is through love, through trust, through surrender, right? The only way to experience those things is if we open ourselves to actually understand what connection is. And so for me, it always comes down to joy, freedom, and fulfillment. If I'm not experiencing life through those 3 things at any given moment, it tells me that something's out of alignment, right? So it's really simple. Joy, freedom, and fulfillment. If those don't exist in my life, I'm not living a successful life.
Yeah. And, you know, it's also important to note that there are times when you get out of alignment. Right?
Totally.
I think sometimes we have this thought that once in our minds we can kind of get things squared away, then, hey, smooth sailing from here on out. But it takes tweaks all along the way, right? In your opinion, what keeps people from putting in the pain to avoid suffering?
I think that, again, our nervous systems are designed to anticipate threat and avoid pain at all costs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also the narratives that the world give us. I mean, literally, look at anything related to pain. It's to reduce, eliminate, or avoid pain at all costs. It's a narrative, right? If you look at masculinity as one example, there's this term toxic masculinity, right? How many of us grew up in a household where it's like, don't cry, suck it up, like, get it together, like, just push through, right? We are often not in a position where we're taught how to think, let alone taught how to feel. And even more expansively on that, we are definitely not put in a situation where we're taught to think about our thinking, think about our feeling, feel our thinking, and feel our feeling, right? This concept of feeling and showing emotions, there's so many narratives that perpetuate it. In fact, I was working with a client yesterday who is financially independent, unbelievably successful. She's a newer client, right? She's reached highest of high levels. Like, she's done some projects that would make people in awe if they knew some of the things that took place. Mm-hmm. But yet all of this, it's really interesting. She also learned, because of her age and generation, to be a successful woman and to operate in her success energy, she needs to shut off emotion at all costs. And this was something that we were starting to work through But here's the reality. When we actually started to unpack all the things that light her up, they have nothing to do with business and they have nothing to do with transactions. They have everything to do with relationships and depth.
Yeah.
However, her business life and her success energy had conditioned her to believe that I need to operate from this intellectual only place because that's where I'll be safe. And that's how I can demonstrate my masculine energy and assert my dominance in these highly male dominated industries. Right. But what has that also done? It's conditioned her to completely disconnect from the emotional side that brings her joy, freedom, and fulfillment.
Sure.
Right. I was no different. I said I was cut off to all these things. And so what is it that prevents us? There's a lot of narratives. And from early on, if we aren't in an environment where we are encouraged to understand our feelings, be able to talk about them, to be able to advocate for ourselves through them, then every time we get emotional, we feel like something is wrong with us, and it only perpetuates the shame cycle that we're trying to escape anyway.
Sure.
Right? So there's all these little patterns that kind of create this path that cause many of us to shut off or to cut off our emotions from the neck up and live a largely intellectual life. I lived there for years. Okay? But here's the other side of this. There is no final destination. There's only constant evolution of self. So yeah, do I consider myself a master, and can I teach master's classes, and do I coach some of the world's highest performers on ways to actually connect holistically with their entire selves, to live the lives that they want, to step fully into the power and potential? Yes, I do.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that I'm a sage from a stage and I don't have these things myself. I'm just like everybody else. And so here's the reality. If you want to continue living your life feeling like garbage, don't do anything about it. Leave it alone. Yeah. Continue to avoid it. Push through and push down, and I promise you, nothing will change.
Yes.
Right? You will continue to repeat those same patterns, even if you think you've compartmentalized it so well that you're going to put it up on a shelf in your closet. Guess what? It's still going to come back and bite you.
Yes.
But here was my reality. I didn't know for years how much I was existing in that low frequency, low energy state. And I didn't ever allow myself to feel below the neck. Yes. Right? I learned to condition myself to not cry. As a man, I wish I had more access to tears, but it doesn't happen frequently because I'm still re-accessing it. And so we have all these years of patterning where we start suppressing these emotions and these real things. But what actually happens is it manifests and shows up in our world differently. I would spend months and years in that tense, low frequency energy and emotional state. Months and years. And I didn't even know it because it was so normalized. But I was miserable and I was suffering.
Yeah.
Right? And then I started to realize these things and unpack them. And then it was months and weeks. And then it was weeks and days. And then it was days and hours.
Sure.
Now I still get triggered. I still get myself in these low frequency states. It still happens. I can absorb it globally. It can be my own thing, but I spend minutes and moments in it today.
Sure.
Why do I say this? Because at the end of the day, it is the hardest work you will ever do.
Yeah.
But it's also the most rewarding, and it will pay the greatest dividends in your life holistically in every category of wealth, which we define as monetary riches, time, relationships, and health. See, the funny thing is, I am existing again a year and 2 months with zero physical pain. I used to regulate. My weight would go up and down, up and down, up and down because I was a stress eater. And so when I wasn't doing well, or I was anxious, or I was stressed, I would eat in excess and I'd swing 20 to 30 pounds up and 20 to 30 pounds down. But for 3 years, it doesn't matter how I move, what I eat, my weight has not moved beyond a 5-pound range. Wow. Everything, when we actually remove this resistance in the trash that's keeping us stuck, everything in our lives starts to flow and we start to receive at a bigger level. So what I'm trying to suggest to all of you is, if you want to feel like garbage, continue to do nothing. But the other side of this I want you to remember is, all of the things that are left unresolved are going to drain your capacity. They're going to drain your energy. They're going to drain your focus. They're going to make it harder to get your body and your health in a place that you want. It's going to make it more difficult to have the relationships with the depth that you want. It's going to make it very difficult to get back time in your life and to be present. And you certainly are not going to be able to have all the things in your life. Even if you have a full bank account, I can promise you your bank account will be full, but you'll still be empty. Yeah, and so the greatest way to fill yourself is to actually remove the things that no longer serve you and begin to fill your empty with the things that do.
One of the things I tell my clients when I'm coaching them is, if nothing changes, nothing changes. Mm-hmm. And I think that applies here so well. And that's the incredible part of the journey, is that we can change.
And I believe, by the way, that we can choose the change we want, or we can choose to change when we don't want change. Either one, we have to accept.
Yeah. There's consequences to both, good or bad. But man, what an incredible conversation this has been, Brian. For my listeners that want to get into your world, where can they find you, Brian? Where can they find out about your coaching and enter into your world?
Yep. If you're a web-based person, go to brianbogert.com. Everything is there. Our podcast, our events, our challenges, our community, our coaching, my speaking, all of it's there. It'll be a great place to distribute. If you're a social media person, I'm at Bogert Brian on all channels. And we genuinely want to help. And we have a lot of free resources as well as a lot of resources that are very low barrier of entry from a financial perspective, because we genuinely want to reach this level of impact. And we realize that a lot of people in this world who want and need the help can't afford some of the higher ticket things that we offer. So we have actually ensured that our world has both. We can serve the highest of high level people and those that ultimately need some help to get themselves back on the right track.
I love it. Ashley and Brian are on a quest to help as many people as they possibly can. And I can tell you from experience that Brian is one of the best human beings I've ever met. You guys are rock solid. You're making a difference in this world. You've made a difference in mine. And just can't wait to see what the future holds for you. Brian, I ask all my guests as we leave, and I'm going to ask you as well, what does it look like to live an abundant life?
An abundant life is when love exists and permeates through everything we do. It neutralizes any and all low frequency energy and emotions, and it actually perpetuates and grows the higher frequency ones like gratitude, appreciation. Love is the connecting fiber for each and every one of us. And I believe that all of us actually want the same thing. We just live in a world where we're more divisive than connected. And I'm trying to facilitate a life where we all get what we want, which is to be connected to the deepest level. And that only exists in environments and a world filled with love.
Well, I'm going to say I love it. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate you. Appreciate all you're doing, and look forward to next time we can jump on a show.
I love you, brother. I'm super proud of you, and I'm grateful that you've now got a platform for others to learn and grow from, and that I had the chance to come be with you today. So thank you, my friend.
Thank you for listening to the RevRx podcast. We hope you enjoyed what you heard today, and if so, we'd love it if you would hit that subscribe button so that you'll never miss a new episode from us. Also, feel free to leave us reviews and comments, as we'd love to hear from you. Be blessed and be the very best you.